Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Patrick, I'm confused this week.
I know.
Confused.
Just on probability. Oh,
Yeah,
wait, no. There's something specific?
Oh, yeah. I'm really confused. I actually don't know.
About?
Bant Company.
Yeah, what about it?
Is it terrible or the best? I can't tell.
This week it was the best. We predicted last week that there would be a resurgence. It just didn't take very long.
It's the best, right? It seems like the best.
Yeah. Part of it is that now that everybody's aiming for the Emerge decks and the Emrakul decks and the Delirium decks, they got to find a happy balance. But part of it is also just that Bant Company is just more of the same. There's an awful lot of the way the Bant Company deck plays out that's the same as what it's been doing for a while. Whereas I think a lot of the people playing at the GPs they haven't necessarily had time to train with and master all of these brand new crazy archetypes.
I think that your point about people preparing for, maybe trying to hate out some of the fancy new decks is a good point. People are playing some crazy stuff to make their opponents pay full price on an Emrakul, right? They've got Days Undoing. They got what's the U3 one that you mess up their graveyard and draw a card. So learn from the past, something like that.
Yep.
And then they've got the one that's BB5, remove your graveyard, and then it's a Yawgmoth's bargain, and not a Yawgmoth's bargain, a Yawgmoth's agenda. You take away their graveyard. So everyone spends all these cards Grappling and Vessel of Nascencying to get their graveyard fat, and then you just take it all away, and then their Emrakul costs 13 now. That's a lot of work that they're doing, and people are doing just devoting really, really narrow cards to just making them play their card normally.
But despite all this, Robert Santana, Jund Delirium.
You said a couple weeks ago you just thought that Black-Green Delirium was the place to be in. And Santana's deck, what do you think about this? It's just Black-Green Delirium with Fiery Impulse? Am I reading this wrong?
No. In addition to Fiery Impulse, it's got Kozilek's Return, and that's the important one. Fiery Impulse is just a bonus.
Oh,
the
Kozilek's Return.
Yes.
The card that invalidates 2/3 of the possible strategies in Standard.
Right.
Oh,
and
that.
In addition to having Emrakul, the Promised End, he's got 2 Distended Mindbenders, which he powers off of his Ishkanagraph Widow, his 3 copies of Ishkanagraph Widow, 2 copies of Nissa Vastwood Seer, and, near and dear to your heart, 3 Pilgrim's Eyes.
I got to tell you, I can get behind this deck.
This
deck has a lot of the elements of things that I like. I think this Distended Mindbender is still underplayed. I think that there's going to be a point where we have decks that are maybe 6 Pilgrim's Eyes and Nissas, maybe some Druids and 4 Distended Mindbenders. They are very consistent setup men for Emrakul.
Well, so it's important to remember that Ishkanagraph Widow is a very important part of the plan. I know it seems weird to sacrifice your 5-drop, but it's a very normal part of the play pattern to do things like play Ishkanagraph Widow on turn 5 to stabilize, and then on turn 6, sacrifice Ishkanagraph Widow after having chump blocked a bunch with your spiders.
Well, you can still have some spiders, right?
No. So here's the thing. You chump block all those spiders, just don't take damage, try to survive, and just bridge so that on turn 6 you can sacrifice Ishkanagraph Widow, Distended Mindbender, so that your opponent has absolutely nothing left, and you have a 5/5. And then you languish because you have exactly 4 mana left over, and your Distended Mindbender lives through languish. The end result, you have a Distended Mindbender, your opponent has nothing. No cards in hand, no cards in play, nothing.
That's a heck of a play pattern.
Likewise, you can Kozilek's Return, and the Distended Mindbender will trigger it on the way in before the Mindbender's in play to die to it. The end result, this is a deck with 3 Kozilek's Returns and 3 Languishes. This deck is so unbelievably hateful towards Bant. He's got so much. And it's not just the 3 Languish and 3 Kozilek's return. Part of it is that Fiery Impulse is an important part of the Languish plan, because he knows that his Languishes are frequently going to get hit by Spell Queller. Fiery Impulse lets him then languish at instant speed for 1 mana. Additionally, Distended Mindbender lets him... He can actually Distended Mindbender, and you're going to love this. He can Distended Mindbender with the Kozilek's return in his graveyard against an opponent that has a Collected Company and mana to use it. What do they do? Because he can stack the triggers from both Distended Mindbender and Kozilek's return, so that the Distended Mindbender's discard ability will resolve before the Kozilek's return. If his opponent Collected Companies in response, the stuff is just going to die to Kozilek's return trigger anyway. If they hold the Collected Company, it's just going to get taken out of their hand anyway by the Distended Mindbender. What's more, he can actually take the Collected Company and the Spell Queller at the same time.
So what you're saying is this deck is very, very powerful and flexible.
Well, yes, and look, just count the best card. We talked about all the best cards from last week. He's got Liliana the Last Hope. He's got Ishka Nagraf Widow. He's got Emrakul the Promised End. He's got Kozilek's Return. And then he doesn't have Elder Deep-Fiend. He's got Distended Mindbender, which is the most Elder Deep-Fiendy card there is. Like, it's the other one. This is cramming so much of the best power cards that you can together. And this is the first really strong deck I've seen that so elegantly marries both Kozilek's Return and Languish together, while still also presenting a very real plan for interacting with people who don't just fold to your 6 hard sweepers. He's got Ishka Nagraf Widow, and the fact that Ishka Nagraf Widow combined with Distended Mindbender, Nissa, Pilgrim's Eye, Liliana the Last Hope, this is so many 2-for-1s. And then Vessel of Nascency and Grapple the Past for so much recursion. Traverse the Ulvenwild to just go get more 2-for-1s. And as if this wasn't enough, the Emrakul endgame is devastating to people who don't lose to Languish and Kozilek's Return. So this is a super dope deck. This is the best deck.
There are 2 things I love about this deck. No lies. Number 1, the inclusion of Traverse the Ulvenwild. Because he's got 3 Traverse the Ulvenwild. I mean, I wish it was 4, and so he doesn't have to play so many Emrakuls. Right, he's not going to get gobbed up by Emrakuls early. If you have an early Traverse the Ulvenwild, just go get a land with it, which is good. And it allows him to have some measure of like long game kind of toolbox flexibility. Like, you could be in a situation where, let's say for sake of argument, your opponent has a Planar Outburst in their hand, right? So if you get Emrakul, even if you take their turn, you're just going to lose your Emrakul. But you could just take Nissa and then just play your 7th land and then just have a Planeswalker going. And that's very good. And his Planar Outburst isn't very good against that.
Yeah.
And that's really you can't really overemphasize how powerful that level of flexibility is in an endgame situation, right? That's one thing.
Look, the Dragon Master Outcast in the sideboard, another perfect example of this. Having such a mana efficient way. A mana efficient threat, so that you can spend 1 mana with Traverse and then 1 mana on your Dragon Master Outcast, and the rest of the mana in your turn doing anything else you need in order to take control of the game.
I mean, you could just have 6, right? You can go Languish Your Face, Ulvenwild, Dragon Master Outcast, go, right? Mm-hmm. And how do you think this one's going to end up? That's another thing that's awesome. But then the other thing that's so cool about his deck is he actually has black mana. So unlike a bunch of the Ishkana decks we've seen in the past week or 2, where Ishkana was already very good with Delirium, this one can actually machine gun people. And that is not 0. That's pretty good.
And it's not just that he has 16 lands that make black, which is already a real good chunk. 3 Pilgrim's Eyes, 3 Traverse the Ulvenwilds, 3 Vessel of Nascencies. This is a deck. Even Grapple with the Past works, because sometimes you go sometimes you just go activate my Vessel of Nascency. Oh, there's 2 land. I get 1, and 1 goes to the graveyard. And then you use the Grapple with the Past to get it back. Or you just grapple blind and hope that you flip a land because you're like, I need some black. I need a second black for this Liliana on turn 3.
I mean, people just grapple blind. That card is so good.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I thought it would be pretty good when I saw it. You know, it's just like, oh, this card's like really good. And then I was like, oh, wow. When you actually see it being played in tournament coverage or whatever, I'm like, this card is insane. And it's an instant. What were they thinking?
They were thinking that they want to get more regrowths to be played.
Because
you've noticed, like, between Den Protector, Grapple with the Past, Pulse of Marasa, they've been making a lot of good green regrowths lately. And Robert has all of them.
Yeah, he's got all of them. Oh, yeah. I love Pulse of Marasa. I love it when people have it in their main deck. I was like, the person who has Pulse of Marasa in their main deck, they know what they want in life, I think.
Yes, they mean it.
That person is just like, we're getting this thing back, and it's going to gain a bunch of life, and he's got it all. So you think this? I think this is the best deck too.
I love this deck.
It's really good, and Bant Company, had a good showing in Europe, but this deck is so sexy, and Liliana the Last Hope is really on parade here because this isn't the only deck that Liliana did well in this week. But this one actually can do stuff like get back an Emrakul versus just doing nothing other than killing spirit creatures or something, which also seems to be good enough to win. Those are both good. But this one, Liliana is even stronger than it is in other decks where it is still strong.
Yeah, I mean, Liliana the Last Hope, though, I don't think it's fair to describe this as the only place that had success. Just look at Robert's finals opponent, Travis Wu. That's what I was saying. Travis's Liliana. Oh, Travis's one. Okay.
Yeah, he doesn't get any creatures.
Yeah, he does after sideboard, but not very much. This is a return to the style that we described before with Oath of Liliana being emphasized. But it's still a great use. I mean, Liliana the Last Hope is just such a powerful card.
Don't get me wrong. I think that Travis's deck is outstanding. I think it's really good. I just saying Liliana is much weaker in Travis's deck than it is in Santana's deck.
Michael Hance put it to good use in his more traditional black-green Delirium deck, which he also top-8'd with. This is just very similar to the style that we saw at the Pro Tour with Grasp of Darkness instead of Fiery Impulse, and then just a lot less sweeper action, a little bit more tireless tracker. But Liliana the Last Hope, definitely fantastic in this deck,
So I like Travis's deck better than the other black-green variations that I've seen. Black-white variations that I've seen. For one reason, specifically one and then one in the sideboard, which is the inclusion of Planar Outburst. So Travis has only 3 language, but he has a Planar Outburst in his main deck and a Planar Outburst in his sideboard. And this is not like a new card or anything, but if you do some playtesting in Standard, I mean, the number of times that I've cast the card Emrakul, the Promised End, and then when I took control of my opponent's turn, saw that they had a Planar Outburst in their hand, I was just like, I just cast Emrakul and I'm not going to win this game. They were stunning to me how good just having that card in your deck somewhere is when your opponents are playing Emrakuls. And it's not like it's a get-out-of-jail-free card, but, if they can't, and I'm telling you, I would just ruin them on the free turn, right? Take away a bunch of cards. But it's so much energy to get the Emrakul online, right? You're devoting so many resources to this. And like you said before, you often devote a ton of resources just to bridging, to be alive, to be in this position while they're playing their traditional regular cards. Getting Planar Outbursts is horrendous for you. Because you might not have anything left, right? The card advantage in a lot of these Emrakul decks is progressive, right? Just here's my 2-for-1, here's my 2-for-1, here's my bridge card, and then you play this Haymaker, and your expectation is, because you steal their turn, and which is probably worth 4 cards or something, you have a 13-13, you should win the game, right? You use 2 attacks or so. I don't need it to last very long. When you're playing against a card like Planar Outburst, it just it's. I've been in positions where I have 2 Distended Mindbenders and a planar and an Emrakul. And I'm just like, then they rip Planar Outburst. Or even they have it in their hand when I cast the Emrakul, right? Because they ripped it in the intermediary turn. And you're just like, I can't do anything. So it's because they get consecutive turns, right? So
yep.
Yeah, it's. I think Planar Outburst is a card that, if you want to be just a little bit leveling up relative to where the format's been, this is an area of opportunity. So we've seen this weird dance in the green-white decks, right? That's like Planar Outburst a little bit, or Tragic Arrogance a little bit, or Tragic Arrogance a lot, and like, oh, well, Selfless Spirit counters this, Tragic Arrogance is better. I think that Planar Outburst is very, very disproportionately strong if people are playing, Emerge guys and Emrakuls. That's my reading.
There is another Liliana the Last Hope use that's actually deceptively better than it. It's got more. It uses more. To use a Floresian term, it uses, at the very least, more parts of the buffalo than meets the eye. So Liliana the Last Hope in Chris Botello's Grixis Pact deck.
So pause.
Yeah.
Pause. Meow. Okay. Pause. We've been doing this podcast for a while, right? Going on 2 years, probably. I'm guessing there has never been a deck ever that somebody else built that we would talk about in Standard on this podcast ever in the history of other people playing tournaments that is more mutually in our wheelhouses than Chris Botello's Grixis deck.
You're saying because it's a Grixis deck for me, and because it's full of weird cards that are so fancy and clever for you.
Hybrid combo deck for me.
Yes.
I am the original, let's play 2 Splinter Twins in our otherwise regular deck, right? This deck, it's a Grixis deck for you, and it's got Demonic Pact. How many times have I been like, hey, Patrick, let's just figure out how to play Demonic Pact?
How much do you love 7 Oaths? Don't need Planeswalkers to power Oaths. 7 Oaths.
Just oath it up, man.
Oath it up.
Planeswalkers.
So the 2 Liliana the Last Hopes are so clever here for a couple reasons. First, the card is a messed up card. People go after it. They want to stop it from shrinking their creatures. They don't know you don't have creatures. They don't always know what you're up to. But here are 2 really, really, really smart things you can do with Chris Botello's Liliana the Last Hope. First and foremost, you mill yourself. If you need to, you could mill yourself, because there's certain scenarios where if you have Dark Petition that you could just do, that you like, if you just desperately need. And I don't think that really comes up that often. Most of the time you're using Liliana in conjunction with Grasp at Artemis, or Fiery Impulse, just kill bigger creatures or small creatures in general, whatever. But if you mill yourself, you really do actually get to trigger the Dark Petition extra black mana. And I know you love how fancy of a play that is.
Oh, man, of course. I just mill myself with Liliana sometimes, just hope if I don't like their creature or they don't have much, just see what happens. I've done it. That's just, and it's a great card there. But the other one, and this one, I don't recommend this one for the novice. This is definitely some expert level trolling. An expert level play. Sometimes you Harmless Offering and just give your opponent Liliana the Last Hope. And then you use your other Harmless Offering to give them Demonic Pact, so they die on their upkeep. But you just got to give them that glimmer of hope, mixed with confusion. Like, are you a crazy person? Or like, what's going on? What's happening here? I don't know. This deck is super cool, right? Like, the Oaths are the all jokes aside, the use of the Oaths is actually really clever, because one of the things that Chris identified was that Dromoka's Command is going to just be so overwhelmingly popular, and he needs to make sure that there are some enchantments that can give him some protection, so that his Demonic Pact will actually have a chance to draw him extra cards and make his opponent discard. See, one of the nice things is they can't really hold the Dromoka's Command, because usually you can go after their hand hard with the discard part of Dromoka's Command. I mean, with Demonic Pact. Yeah.
Right. But, like, it is important to make sure you get to use it at all. Because if you just play Demonic Pact for 4 mana and then they Dromoka's Command it for 2 mana and also get a +1/+1 out of the deal, you're way behind. But if you've got like an Oath of Chandra and Oath of Jace in play, I mean that's no sweat. That's no problem anymore.
Oh yeah, I thought that the use of the Oath in this deck was just it's so obvious after you see it, but it's so elegant also.
Well, but there's other little things. Like, for instance, Silumgar's Command can bounce one of your oaths. If you have an Oath of Chandra in play, you can use Silumgar's Command to give something -3/-3, bounce your Oath of Chandra, and then play the Oath of Chandra to kill the other 3/3. Or if you have Oath of Jace, you can bounce the Oath of Jace in order to keep drawing more cards. You know, just keep going, keep digging. And that's to say nothing of the fact that you can
filtering card if you have enough mana.
Yeah, and this deck uses both Oath of Jace and Anticipate, in addition to the Dark Petition. And I like the mix. You know, this is a deck that has a lot of selection. It looks at a lot of cards. It's kind of nice that it actually mixes up the different costs. Because it's not so much about when do you want Anticipate in certain spots or Oath of Jace in certain spots. It's not about that. It's about the fact that sometimes you have 2 mana you can afford to spend. Sometimes you have 3. Sometimes you have 5. You know, and so like he spreads out the cost of his library manipulation. It's also just nice to have a little bit of card filtering when you have all these reactive cards. You know, because not every matchup is one where you just want to have Languishes and Radiant Flames for days. And it's also nice to not have to play a million bounce cards. I mean, he's got 2 Disperses and 1 Silumgar's Command, because an awful lot of his plan is the fact that he has 2 Harmless Offerings and 3 Dark Petitions to go get them.
Yep. The one thing, you know, I hate to critique is just because I like this deck so much. It's so cool. Given the anticipation of these kind of weak offensive decks where they're really powerful because they go into, you know, big emerge creatures or obviously Emrakul, those decks oftentimes, even Owen in the Pro Tour Finals, are weak to a fast Planeswalker. They don't have fast attackers that have positive power. And even if they have a reasonable creature, so the deck has more than enough defense against a low offense type deck. I would just love to be able to go up to 4 Lilianas against one of those, because you could Liliana Ultimate is a realistic play against them, right? If you're disrupting them, and you don't even have to like full on lock them or anything, because a Clash of Wills and a couple of negates is just going to buy you enough time to go to Liliana Ultimate, and I just think that respecting that line without having to go all the way to combo killing them with Demonic Pact is just it's a low-cost way to win.
One of the things that he does is use Dark Petition to go search up his 1 Silumgar's Command. And obviously the 3 black mana from Dark Petition can help cast it. But Silumgar's Command gives him a bullet that he can use to knock down a Planeswalker while also bouncing his own Demonic Pact to get him out of the situation, or just progressing his game plan in some other way. Additionally, having access to Oath of Chandra will sometimes allow him to just send a little bit of surprise damage upstairs, most notably on like a Jace Vryn's Prodigy that has ticked down to 2.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
But very, very, very cool deck.
Yeah,
including the very important Infinite Obliteration in the sideboard, so that he can actually take Emrakul out of the deck for these Emrakul decks, you know?
Yeah, and of course he's got Dark Petition to set that up. And his deck is all spells. He can go up to 4 Dark Petitions. I think it's probably pretty trivial for him to have Spell Mastery by the time he has 5 mana.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's part of the reason why it's no sweat using these oaths. I mean, it's not like Oath of Chandra is the deciding point that often. Oath of Jace sometimes will enable Spell Mastery even better.
Absolutely.
So one deck that did not use Liliana, but it did hit a number of our other top card hits was Oliver with Oliver Tomaszko. I apologize for butchering the name, but to the playing the Temur Emerge deck that the Pantheon. Actually, this version was this version actually combines. Like it's a lot like the Pantheon build, but it incorporates a bunch of elements of the build like Andrew Brown and his team developed. This build is grapple with the past, Kozilek's return, gather the pack, Ishkanograph Widow, Emrakul, all that stuff, right? He's got all that stuff, but then he's also using Primal Druid to power out Wretched Griff. This is truly a best of both worlds deck.
Yeah, so he's got Traverse the Uvenwald, which is a card that Owen didn't play, right? Even if he only has 2. And like you said,
that is a card that Andrew Brown used, though.
Yeah,
it's 2 of.
But then just having the 2 of there gives him a similar amount of flexibility to get a 1 copy of Emrakul the Promised End. But he can also do the Chain My Elder Deep-Fiends, right? So he's got 4 Elder Deep-Fiends. He's got a bunch of the setup creatures, and he's got a couple of Sanctum of Ugins to keep this going. And you don't have to do it for too long. These guys have a substantial amount of power, right? So, 3-4 attacks in, and the opponent's going to be dead.
I think it's just so clever. Like, when you're already dealing with, like the Pantheon deck, hybridized Teamer Emerge with Red Green Ramp. For Oliver to synergize Andrew Brown team's Teamer deck with the Pantheon Teamer deck, this deck does look like, it's ambitious, but this does look like a little bit of best of both worlds, Getting the Sanctum of Ugin, making sure to actually, I love having an opportunity to have 2 Sanctum of Ugins in here and just have a higher land count so that you can actually play less Emrakuls and still have access to them.
Yep.
Since you can use Elder Deep-Fiend to go get your Emrakuls. And Sanctum of Ugin, it's tough to support, but by moving away from Vessel of Nascency and just relying less on the combo and instead using Traverse the Ulvenwild for when you do want a combo and instead being a little more tempo-oriented beatdown, this is just a really clever deck. It's also got a little bit more, a few more creatures to sacrifice. Because it's not like you're trying to sacrifice Jace, but sometimes you just sacrifice.
Sometimes you do it.
And 2 Nissas, 3 Pilgrim's Eyes, and 4 Primal Druids. And that's to say nothing of using Wretched Griff as the creature you sacrifice to Elder Deep-Fiend.
Wretched Griff, this guy's better than I thought he got drawn up on paper when he came out. I've actually been pretty impressed by him, right? He's a great 3-4 play off of Pilgrim's Eye. He doesn't get spell quellered. He holds the table pretty well, actually.
Well, so the most important thing about Wretched Griff. This is a very, very, very important thing about Wretched Griff. Wretched Griff, despite the fact that you and I think about Wretched Griff as costing 6 or less, right? Wretched Griff costs 7. So Wretched Griff means that you have a ton of ways to trigger your Kozilek's return, including earlier than your opponent thinks you should be able to. Because when you play a Pilgrim's Eye, when you play a Pilgrim's Eye, your opponent already knows what it's hitting for. They already know that you could use an Elder Deep-Fiend to trigger the Kozilek's return that you flipped over from Grapple with the Past or Jace on turn 2. But when you have Wretched Griff in your deck, you can throw your opponent curveballs. Because for instance, if you have a Primal Druid in play, or even just that Jace we discussed, you can use 4 land and a Primal Druid to cast a Wretched Griff off a merge and trigger your Kozilek's return a turn before you should be able to.
Oh, and there's some fancy stuff you can do. Like, what if you don't have a Kozilek's return in your graveyard, right? And you just have a Jace? And they're laying out their stuff, and you're like, all right, on my turn, I'm going to use my Jace to discard Kozilek's return, play my 4th land, and cast my Wretched Griff. How's it taste? Right? You've got a huge flyer, draw a card, and sweep their board all at once. That's a heck of a turn. Thanks for your sacrifice, Jace.
And there's a perfect curve that happens where you play a Primal Druid on turn 2. Turn 3, at instant speed, you Kozilek's return and you just cast it. Then you untap and drop Wretched Griff and actually trigger the Kozilek's return, decimating them.
I've actually been pretty impressed by Primal Druid because he has 3 toughness. Like, he's actually the card's pretty good, right? He lives through your own Kozilek's return.
Yep.
And he certainly absorbs all the Jackal Pups that the White Weenie deck plays if they don't have an Always Watching. Right? He's just like, eh. And he's pretty good against the zombies, too. Right? Like, a lot of them are just 2/2s, and he just holds the board, and his job is to just force the opponent to play multiple creatures, because he's just I'm just a good dummy, and you can't get by me, though. And then they have to play 2 or 3 things, and then your Kozilek's return always gets its money. Right?
But then here's the other part of the Retrogriff combo that's so good. Let's say you do this whole Retrogriff thing on, you use Primal Druid to cast a Retrogriff. When you use Primal Druid to cast a Retrogriff, you go from 4 up to 5 because of Primal Druid already. Now, you can actually sacrifice Retrogriff. So what you do is when you go 4 up to 5, you also sacrifice your Sanctum of Ugin. And you go get Elder Deep-Fiend. Because Retrogriff means that you don't have to just use Elder Deep-Fiends to chain each other. You can use your Retrogriff to tutor up an Elder Deep-Fiend to start the party. Then if you need to, despite the fact that sacrificing the Sanctum of Ugin means you're back down to 4, you can actually just Elder Deep-Fiend off the Retrogriff, spending 2 mana, and still progress your turn with anything else you want.
Yeah, let's say you have some mana open, you could just grapple with the past.
Exactly.
Go get back your Sanctum, and this is a party they're not invited to, actually.
Yes. It's so smart. It's so smart. The fact that it triggers Sanctum of Ugin and Kozilek's Return, and this is a deck that uses both of those synergies. And this deck actually gets to use Jace Vryn's Prodigy to great effect. Because in the Pantheon style, there would be so much more. There's just so much more risk of Jace dying because of a shortage of good targets early on. The Angel Brown style doesn't make good enough use of the graveyard all the time to justify shoving as I shouldn't say you can still do it, but this deck gets more Jace Vryn's Prodigy action than either of those two.
Actually, that's a good point, right? So think about all of the new sideboard technology that came out this week, right? Days Undoing. What's an expensive black card called? Like whatever it's called.
Sorin Grim, Sorin, the
black 5 one that removes their graveyard and then it becomes the Yawgmoth's agenda for you. Whatever it's called. Super expensive black card. And then there's also the Lessons from the Past, right? So it's U3, nix their graveyard, draw a card. Like, people are playing all of these cards because they're specifically targeting...
Who's actually playing the 7-cost black one that you're talking about?
I don't know. I read about it a lot. It was on Twitter. It was on
over in Europe?
I know. I think it was over here. I mean, by over here, I mean it's
top 8.
No, it didn't. But these are things people are talking about, and certainly things people are playing.
I see.
Right? So, but these cards they're all targeting Emrakul. The beauty about this deck is Oliver's got enough Emrakul, which is 1 copy of Emrakul plus Traverse the Uvenwald and Sanctum of Ugin to keep people honest. But he's also in a position where he can have the opponent misidentify his game plan, right? Because he has that Emrakul. And maybe they over-sideboard for things that aren't that effective against him. Because this deck is just fine if he plays the Andrew Brown game. And you just, Time Walk chains the opponent. And I think that's pretty cool, right? Because they kind of have to respect his deck. I think... if you're the kind of player who's going to devote a bunch of sideboard cards to Days Undoing, et cetera, I think you're likely to bring them in when you're facing against somebody who has Green Acceleration and Emrakuls. Am I wrong?
There's a part of me. Maybe I'm. Maybe this is too conspiracy theory-esque, but I mean, the truth is that jet fuel doesn't melt still beams. That's just true. The thing is that I wonder if these narratives about 7-cost graveyard hate and Days Undoing as a sideboard card, there is a part of me that wonders a little bit if there is some amount of trying to make the narrative about something else besides Bant.
I can see that. I mean, Bant was so successful in Europe this week.
Oh, yeah. Taking 6 of the top 8, including the finals, first and second. The only deck to reach top 8 besides Bant Company were these two copies of Blue-Red Thermo Alchemist, including Lucas Blohan. Crushing.
Heck of a follow-up to his Pro Tour finish. Lucas Blohan. Let's talk. I don't think we've talked about the Blue-Red Thermo Alchemist deck yet, have we?
No, let's swing over to that one.
So I think this is. I mean, I think that Jund deck is probably the best deck, like you said, at least of last week.
It's my favorite. I don't know. I haven't played enough with these decks to know which one is better. But
the Blue-Red Fevered Visions deck is this. It's a kind of the breakout strategy, I think. This deck, a version of it went 9-1 at the Pro Tour, I want to say. And then this, Lucas obviously has refined it. So this version,
and Simon Enkels, which their list did not arrive on the same spot though. So let's talk about Lucas's first.
Yeah, so Lucas's deck has got 4 Storm Chaser Mages and 4 Thermo Alchemists. So this version doesn't have Thing in the Ice, right? But then he's got...
Well, none of them have Thing in the Ice anymore. I think the important distinction is the Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Thing in the Ice has lost a little bit of utility recently because of just how many horrors there are running around, like Elder Deep-Fiend.
It's also pretty bad.
Is that true? Is Elder Deep-Fiend even a horror? Or am
I think that half these guys that you could be bouncing are atrocious to bounce. That's one, right? And the other thing is, like, there's no rush decks to block early and then punish with the upheaval ability, right? Like, everybody's just got, like, these value guys like Pilgrim's Eye. Well, not everybody, right? But it's
just to be clear, by the way, I'm sorry to jump in, but just to be clear, Elder Deep-Fiend is not a horror. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm thinking of the other Eldrazi ones. But yeah, keep going, sorry.
Both the offensive and defensive capabilities on Thing in the Ice have lost some sheen based on just other movements in the format.
Yeah.
But the card that is unbelievable in the Blue-Red deck is Fevered Visions, right? Like,
yeah, definitely. That is the one.
I think people have because, from the first days of Howling Mine, people are always like, oh, I'm gonna take advantage of this Howling Mine. They're dumb. They're giving me card advantage. No. That Fevered Visions, unless you're playing the Mirror in Standard, I think the Fevered Visions is typically disproportionately going to help the opponent. Among other things, the card advantage...
No. In Standard? You always draw the card first. I think Fevered Visions...
I'm sorry. I'm talking
about
someone... No. I'm talking about someone who's playing against a player with Fevered Visions. The guy who owns the Fevered Visions is at the advantage.
You're
That's
right.
what I'm saying.
Yep,
okay?
You're absolutely right.
So, among other things, the card advantage that it's giving you is causing you to take damage. And they're a burn deck. Do the math.
It's like a double. It's like, because you're taking 2 each turn, it's not just that they're on a Howling Mine that's ahead of you. You're also getting shocked a lot. And each of those shocks is like an extra card.
Yeah, I really like Lucas's version. So he's got 4 Fever Visions, and he's got 4 Storm Chaser Mage and 4 Thermo Alchemist for creatures. Then he's got Tormenting Voice, Collective Defiance, Incendiary Flow, only 2 copies of Exquisite Firecraft, 2 Lightning Axes, and then 4 Fiery Impulse and 4 Fiery Temper. That's like 4 Fiery Temper, 2 Exquisite Firecraft. I mean, you kind of need to know where you're going to have that combo.
I love the move away from things like Pyromancer's Goggles and Magmatic Insight, and instead just focusing on base damage. Like, obviously, when you cut 2 Lightning Axes to make room for extra Incendiary Flows, you're making a statement. But this deck, it's not just that you have 4 Fiery Temper that goes upstairs, 4 Incendiary Flow that goes upstairs, 2 Exquisite Firecraft that goes upstairs. How excellent of use does this deck make of Collective Defiance? Often killing a creature and going upstairs and giving you a brand new hand. In addition to you being able to filter very quickly, looking for more burn, it is kind of funny sometimes just how much the ability to mill yourself powers up things like the sideboard Bedlam Revelers. And this is a card that we talked about. A lot of people were very skeptical of Bedlam Reveler, but here, already putting up a big finish in premier events, Bedlam Reveler as part of Lucas's sideboard plan, along with Gold Knight Castigator.
Bedlam Reveler is the real deal. And you talked about it in Modern also. The opponent that I had in the PPTQ that I won 2 weeks ago now had Bedlam Reveler in his deck. I think this is a real card, and it's it's going to do real damage in multiple formats.
Yep. And then the use of Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Gold Knight Castigator, and Bedlam Reveler is a classic transformational-esque cyber.
I love it.
And you might be saying, well, he already has Storm Chaser Mage and Thermal Alchemist. How is this a transformational sideboard? Well, look at the texture of Storm Chaser Mage and Thermal Alchemist. Those are both creatures that are not the most resilient in the world. They're just trying to get some damage in. And if you end up killing them after they've done some damage, fine. So be it. The types of action, the types of responses that Gold Knight Castigator, Bedlam Reveler, and Jace Vryn's Prodigy called for are very different. If a Thermal Alchemist is able to sit and play for a full turn, nothing happens. If Jace Vryn's Prodigy sits and play for a full turn, this is a deck that flips it trivially immediately. Gold Knight Castigator has haste and is a big threat. It's bigger, hits harder, and it's bigger than the sort of thing they might be used to. Like if they're sideboarding in things to do, 2 or 3 damage, or if they're relying on things like Grasp of Darkness or Languish, Gold Knight Castigator, no problem with that. Bedlam Reveler, when it enters play, you're drawing through a whole bunch of extra cards. So even if they had removal, that's not the right way to fight it. But in addition, the Thermal Alchemist is being powered by the deck with things like Fevered Visions. Because Fevered Visions is flooding you with all these extra spells, you're getting extra untaps for Thermal Alchemist.
So I would look at it like this. Both Storm Chaser Mage and Thermal Alchemist kind of function like burn spells, right?
Yep.
So like the interaction that you have against these creatures is very different than you would against like a value creature or just an aggressive big threat like Gold Knight Castigator. And there's like subtle things, right? Like Storm Chaser Mage is very good against ultimate price. So you're like, oh, they have Thermal Alchemist, the guy doesn't do that much damage. I'm gonna lean on this card. All of a sudden, they're bringing in big, powerful cards like Bedlam Reveler and Gold Knight Castigator that are very bad against ultimate price, and the opponent might not have that card in their deck at the time.
And it's not like they
might have shaved, right?
Yep. And they can't count on for sure you're going to have those. Because, look at Simon Enkels.
Wait,
please finish.
Last thing, though. The thing that I love about Lucas's sideboard strategy is that he can capture a large percentage of what Saito was doing at the end of the last Grand Prix cycle with all the 2/1 spirits. Because Storm Chaser Mage is very similar to those guys in terms of, he's a flying creature for 2. He only has 1 power to start. But unlike them in the current standard, he's not nearly as vulnerable to Liliana. And I'm not saying he's good against Liliana, right? But he's way better than any of the 2/1 creatures are against Liliana. But Lucas can just go into like a Storm Chaser Mage and Gold Knight Castigator kind of haste flying aggro plan and just do so much damage to people. Like the Storm Chaser Mage Fevered Visions Gold Knight Castigator 2-3-4 sequence puts people in a bad spot, right? Those are 3 very different threats. You have to deal with them individually. Probably don't even have a card that deals with Fevered Visions, and just always fuel, and everything's just doing damage. Put people on the back foot.
And it's not like they can just load up on ultimate price because they're like, oh yeah, for sure he's just going to have Jace and Gold Knight Castigator. Because look at Simon Enkels, who sideboarded in addition to 1 Bedlam Reveler, he actually sideboards in 4 Sphinx's Tutelages. So you sideboard in all these ultimate prices, and when you go left, he goes right. And now he's actually just going to run you out of cards.
Oh my God.
Including sometimes you just collective defiance your opponent and make them discard all the cards in their hand and draw that many cards.
This is just like if Saito got married to Andrew Cuneo.
And by the way, I'm talking about collective defiance when you don't even have a Sphinx's Tutelage anymore. Like if they ever get out of it with a Dromoka's command. Because one of the things you can do is if you just have Sphinx's Tutelage in play, you can actually just collective defiance yourself to mill your opponent hard.
For like 7, right?
14. 2 per. For every card you draw, they're milling 2.
Unbelievable.
Right? And what's more, if they're both non-land cards, repeat. So you'll actually just go nuts. You just put so many triggers.
This is too cool. I love it.
Unsubstantiate, too, by the way. Cool card. I love the use, too, of as small numbers. Sometimes unsubstantiate just solves hard-to-solve problems. But also sometimes you just get them with fevered visions where they think they're one under, and you pop them back up.
I like it so much because in this deck, if you've got fever visions going, like they're going to be flooded on cards.
Yep.
And your cards might not be that good individually. Like Lightning Axe is not a great card. Unsubstantiate is not necessarily a great card. Fiery Temper and Fiery Impulse are they could be very good situationally, but they're not super high power cards. But these cards all have a very, very specific superpower, which is that they cost nothing. They're so cheap, and that when the opponent is flooding and the opponent's deck is full of 3s and 5s and 13s, then it's just guaranteeing that they're going to take a ton of damage from Fevered Visions. And they can probably only do one pretty good thing per turn, and you could do 2 or 3 things per turn, some of which are good. And you're just changing the texture of a game to a game where your deck operates and their deck doesn't operate very well.
100% agree. Now, Summary Dismissal and Negate, neither one of these is going to be a surprise, but I am betting that you're going to love the way that Simon uses Psychic Rebuttal. So Psychic Rebuttal, for those not familiar, because this is an oddball card. 1 in a blue, instant. Counter target instant or sorcery spell that targets you. That's a pretty narrow application, right? Target an instant or sorcery that targets you. But it has spell mastery. If there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, you may copy the spell counter this way and choose new targets for the copy. So what you can do with Psychic Rebuttal is that Psychic Rebuttal is his primary anti-Dromoka's Command plan. It's very easy for this deck to have spell mastery. Trivial. You really want to have a way to stop them from just Dromoka's commanding you, getting rid of your Fevered Visions. If you Psychic Rebuttal, Dromoka's command is target player sacrifices an enchantment. You Psychic Rebuttal it, you counter the whole spell, including whatever, how they're I'll destroy your Fevered Visions and counter your burn spell, whatever. No, you counter it so that your Fevered Vision stays, your burn spell stays, and now you control Dromoka's command. So now your Storm Chaser Mage gets the counter, and your Storm Chaser Mage fights their creature.
Can you change the modes?
Yeah, you just copy the spell and choose new targets.
Oh, that's cool.
I think. I don't know.
Well, it certainly counters the Dromoka's command.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure you can copy the modes.
Change the modes.
But either way, it doesn't matter. Those are the same modes. Put a +1/+1 counter on your guy. I guess there's burn spells. But the point is that Psychic Rebuttal gives you a control magic for Dromoka's command at the same price. It's hard to beat Dromoka's command with value, and this is a deck that can actually do that.
I think this is a really surprising week to me because the Pro Tour gave us so many cool decks that were different than a lot of the decks we had seen on the SCG Tour. They're completely different. The format was oh wow, look at how wide open and interesting this is. Look at how many new cards are being utilized from Eldritch Moon. And then we just go 1 week and then we see the Jund deck, which is it's a flowering of a ton of things that seem to be good. It's just so well positioned in the format. And then we have Grixis Cat, which is just
super cool.
It's so cool. I love, and it's just the inclusion of all these enchantments in Grixis Cat. I'm just wow, that's really cool. And then we have this blue-red deck, which was another deck that didn't make top 8 at the Pro Tour. And it's just this is a completely different plan. I'm going to play Fast Magic. What happened to Fast Magic? Everyone was playing these progressive slow games with insanely powerful endgames, but apparently just getting in with a Storm Chaser Mage and then slapping down a Fever Visions on the 3rd turn just gets you a lot of W's.
And this is a format with a lot of room for personalization or technology or doing some fancy stuff the other person's not expecting. One of your favorite deck builders of all time, Hall of Famer Shota Yasuka, Bant Company. What? He's not playing blue-black? How can this be? Oh, of course he's got some technology, though. He's got an Elder Deep-Fiend hiding up in this Bant Company deck.
You can't miss that Elder Deep-Fiend.
Yes, of course Shota's got an Elder Deep-Fiend. He's got to be able to go over the top of you. He's not going to be one-upped by some other, somebody else playing Bant. He's going to come out on top.
Yeah, but when you talk about the personalization, if you look at Paul Rietzel's deck, Paul made his
top 8 over on the U.S. side.
Top 8 in the U.S.
11th top 8 in the U.S.
I just stared. He's playing only Bant Company also. I stared at this deck a bunch, and I was just like, back to Canopy Vista. Oh, wait. There are no Dromokas commands in his main deck. That's never been done before, as far as I can tell, in terms of any collected company deck that had white, right? Not just Bant. Almost every deck has 4 copies. He has 0 copies. And, I was just like, really? That's an insane level of customization.
Yes, that's very, very... he correctly anticipated that the format would be very aware of Dromoka's command.
He is in the Hall of Fame. He's a pretty good player.
One of the best of all time.
I think Randy and I were talking about this at some Pro Tour last year. He's just next level impressive. Like, not just his ability at the tables. He's just doing so many things, He's just really impressive guy. Great player, Hall of Fame. Good human being.
The weekend, though, overall, a lot of really, really cool stuff, It's a little scary how dominant Bant is in certain ways. But despite Bant's influence, after a weekend of a bunch of breakout decks, Black-Green Delirium, Team Merge, multiple different flavors of it, new styles of ramp, this week, Jund Delirium, a very cool evolution. Grixis Pact, brand new awesome archetype. Teamer Emerge, awesome, cool evolution. These blue-red Fevered Visions decks, this is a very dynamic format. So even though the metagame seems to be about a third Bant Company, which is a little gross, maybe we haven't seen all there is to see yet about the format, because despite how popular Bant Company is, there's a ton of awesome decks and a ton of awesome games are getting played.
But it's a super exploitable format, right? Like the Jund deck is a great example of this. That deck is full of Languishes and Kozilek returns and point removal. Like this deck is just like it is the version of a deck that destroys small creatures. Oh, by the way, it also ties for the most powerful end game in the format. And it has a bunch of good card advantage in the middle. Right? Deck's awesome. There's just so many awesome opportunities in Standard.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome, man.
You want to talk about where people can find us?
Yeah, let's see. Let's talk about finding us, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about Top Level Podcast at twitter.com, at Top Level Podcast, or Top Level Podcast on Facebook, or on Patreon.
So, shout out to Moto Zahori, one of our patrons. And there's another. So, and there's toplevelpodcast.com. There's a website called Top Level Podcast. But I actually.
Oh, can you get that when you download a copy of the internet?
You can.
Yes.
But there's another place. There's also Top Level Podcast on YouTube, which we haven't plugged this in a while, but we had a bit of a hiatus on this, but then I figured something out after talking to Marshall Suckling. And so we're always updating also on YouTube every week. It's been like this for, I don't know, several weeks now. So some people have talked to me and said, hey, I'm not allowed to download podcasts at work or something like that, but I can watch YouTube. And so go crazy. All the podcasts, all the new podcasts are updated on YouTube every single week. And we're going to go backwards in time on the library as well. So also Top Level Podcast on YouTube.
Awesome, man. Awesome. All right. Well, talk to you next week. And in the meantime, by the way, a little homework for you. Todd Anderson. Talk about a guy with a lot of trophies. Todd Anderson, this past weekend, SCG Classic, played Blue-Red Thermo Alchemist and brought Thing in the Ice back. Boy, that didn't take long.
One other thing. Just putting it out there. We'll have a bonus episode tomorrow.
Yes. You make a very good point.
Bonus episode tomorrow, so...
with a special preview from Conspiracy 2.
Come back. We'll be here. All right,
see you then. Bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind.